Hi, this is Amy Wan at the StartEngine Summit here in LA, and I'm here with Jamie from Securitize. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
All right, Jamie. So there are a proliferation of security token standards out there. What is going on? What's happening? Why are there so many?
Well, I think it's a great question, right? So I think we've seen over the past few weeks any number of different companies launching standards. And if you have a number of companies launching standards, by nature, those are not standards.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of looking at this thing backwards. Everyone's obsessed with standardizing something that nobody knows how to do, right? And so in our world, what we've been learning is as we go and launch these things with actual marketplaces and exchanges, it's much harder than it appears, and everything you thought of that was right, guess what? You forgot something.
Interesting. Are there any standards in particular that you think right now are getting a lot of traction?
Yeah, ERC20. Like, honestly, we don't need anything else. People have gotten obsessed with it.
ERC 1400?
I don't believe in 1400, 1450, 1442, 14 whatever. None of them matter. All that stuff is noise because it's being deployed by companies who haven't actually issued any security tokens. So people are talking about standards, they're not actually deploying. What we need in this space is to get actual tokens in investors' hands.
What are you seeing now in terms of standards on other blockchains aside from Ethereum?
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at a lot of different blockchains. There's some really interesting ones out there. We've had great conversations with the Neo team, with Cardano, with Stellar, and we're really kind of digging deep, and even EOS, digging deep to understand how we would deploy our protocol in those environments. And for the most part, we found that actually most of what we've built will actually work on these different blockchains. There is some engineering effort, but again, at the end of the day, we're waiting for the full ecosystem to develop around it. So what Ethereum has, which is very powerful, is this ecosystem. Yeah. They have wallets, they have exchanges, consumers are learning how to use it, investors are learning how to use it. Now you have to learn how to use an EOS wallet. I own a bunch of EOS, but I don't actually know how to use it.
Interesting.
I should probably learn that.
Interesting. So, given that there's so many competing blockchains, right? Do you think the future of security tokens is going to exist on public blockchains or private blockchains?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a public security should be listed on a public blockchain. I've heard of some companies trying to create their own variants of it. Thus far, those companies haven't been tremendously successful with it. It remains to be seen if anybody has enough market power to do that. We at Securitize are not building our own private chain. We have no interest in that area. We feel that security should be public, all the information should be public, and it should be traded on public blockchains.
How about for private companies?
So private companies who opt to list securities are going to do that on a public blockchain because they have public investors. They have investors that are all over the world. Why would you hide the transactions from them? It doesn't make sense. We've seen, the only thing I have seen a little bit of is out of Europe, some data protection issues that have come up. For the most part, with what we do at least, everything is hashed, and so none of it's actually visible. And we hash identity on the blockchain as a component of what we do, and so that's sufficient around European regulatory law, which is the most strict in this environment. So for now, I don't think there's anything really needed that has to be on like a secret private blockchain that nobody knows about.
Do you think the future of the security token industry is going to be with a self-custodial flair or with these custodial entities?
Well, I think it's a mix, right? It depends on the investor. At the end of the day, an institutional investor needs a custodian to hold these securities. They can't do that, right? Whereas a family office who's relatively well-versed in technology can hold their own securities if they feel comfortable doing it. It's hard. It's not, the systems aren't there. We've seen some new stuff from Ledger, which looks super promising in that area for self-custody and for governance, which is another piece people don't talk about enough. With these securities, how do you transfer them? When do you issue them? Who has the rights to issue them? How is that controlled? So all those different things aren't really there yet. They're being built by a few companies, which will help. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to have self-custody, and we're going to have institutionals using custodians who are insured and regulated.
So given that now, at least some people who have that capability can presumably hold their own security token, what happens if they lose their private keys?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the security token space, it's not as big an issue, right?
Yeah.
So you lose your keys, and you can prove that you've lost them and that you had control of that wallet, and everything was done properly through a proper forensics investigation, then those tokens can be reissued or burnt on the existing ones. So you can basically pull them back and reissue them. So it's not as much of an issue, but it's still a security, it's still a bearer instrument, so it has to be treated with the appropriate protection.
Is there any topic that you think has not been adequately addressed or has been talked about enough in the security token space today?
Capital formation. You know, to me, like talking tech in this space is actually not that useful. What we have to focus on is getting investors into the space. It's a very hard space. Carlos, my co-founder, said it last month. You know, it was like 99% of the people didn't know. Now we've done this whole push around security tokens. Now 98% don't know about security tokens. It's a 1% increase. And so nobody knows about this space. We're talking to ourselves, we need to bring investors into it and really make them comfortable with it and stop focusing so much on tech.
What do you think is going to be the thing that makes investors want to invest in security tokens more?
I mean, the fundamental missing piece right now is anywhere to trade these things, right? Be it a marketplace or an exchange, they don't exist in any live formats yet, right? So we're testing with a number of companies. We're seeing things that are about to happen, and I think we'll start to see the first trades this month. Once we see those first trades happen, I believe we'll see a new wave of demand for these products, and then we'll get to see in 6 to 9 months if the second wave hits, and then when that happens, we have a real business.
And so, when are all these ATSs and exchanges that have been talked about and promised, when are they coming out?
What day is today? I think, honestly, I think we'll see a few of them this month, and we'll see a couple of next month, and it'll kind of roll from there. It's going to take some time. There's some other gaps. People aren't thinking about, you know, how do you make a market in this space? Who's going to do it? How does that business function? Who's going to hold the securities when they make the market? Who's going to lend it to them? There's a lot of fringe issues that don't really come up until you start trading. So I think that'll be a next phase in like investor relations. Nobody's talking about that. How do you do that?
Yeah. One thing that we always saw in the crowdfunding industry was the adverse selection problem, right? People approaching us where it was like they couldn't raise money any other way, and so they think, oh, I'm going to use this new avenue of money, it's going to get me the money. How do we combat that in the security token industry?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think there's a few different layers of filters. You know, the way we look at businesses and we filter them out because we don't have unlimited capacity yet. Hopefully we'll have it at some point, but right now we simply can't do every deal that comes through the door, right? And so what we have to do is look at the track record of the kind of companies. We split them up into kind of 3 areas. Venture funds, operating businesses, and real estate, right? If you're a first-time VC, this is not a good avenue for you, right? If you're a first-time startup business with no traction, this is not a good avenue for you. You know, and on real estate, if you've never done anything in this space, it's probably not going to work out because raising money in this space isn't easier.
Yeah.
It's harder. And so you have to get out there and sell these securities to people in a new format. You better have a track record behind you.
And so if it's harder, why are issuers clamoring at your door wanting to issue these things?
Well, so I mean, I think there's 2 reasons that are really fundamental, and they're much bigger than they sound on the surface, right? So global capital formation and the ability to sell a security to anybody in the world is a humongous, world-changing thing, right? This hasn't happened yet. You haven't had the ability in today's markets for somebody in Japan to buy an investment in a venture fund in the US with cryptocurrency. Today you can do that, right? It's a whole different ecosystem. And then the promise of liquidity, right? That's happening, it's coming, it's going to take longer than everybody wants, but this promise of the marketplace and the exchanges is really going to be the 2 major areas that we're going to see change the world.
What do you think is going to happen with all those other jurisdictions, the Maltas, the Singapores of the world, that right now are kind of playing a little bit of regulatory arbitrage?
Well, you know, I think naturally investors have a flight to quality, right? And so they're going to look for environments where they feel comfortable placing their money. And it's also going to depend on custody, where these securities are, right? It's actually not as big an issue to trade through Malta security token because, to be honest, you can custody the token yourself, you can trade it, and you get the money back into your own wallet. It's not like you have to deposit the money in a Maltese bank. It's not like you're going to Bank Aleppo to deposit it, right? So, you know, I don't see that as much of an issue, but I do think the exchanges and the marketplaces have a tremendous responsibility there in order to stay secure and make it so that this environment works.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your insight, Jamie.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This is Amy Wan reporting from the StartEngine Summit in LA.